My best friend of 12 years launched my business on a Saturday morning in April, under a different name with a logo I had never seen, at an event she had been planning for 3 months while still texting me good morning every single day. I found out the way you find out about most betrayals that happen in public, through someone else, a mutual contact who sent me a screenshot of the launch post with a single message attached. Is this yours? Pause. Let it sit. I looked at the screenshot for a long time. The framework was mine. The pricing structure was mine. The client onboarding language was mine, lightly reworded the way people reword things when they want to obscure the origin without changing the substance. The core idea, the one I had spent 14 months developing and shared with her under a signed agreement, was mine in every way that mattered, and now had her name above it. Stay with me, because 3 weeks before that Saturday morning, I had placed every original document, every time-stamped email, every draft, and a copy of the NDA she had signed 14 months earlier into a folder on my intellectual property attorney's desk. I had not known exactly when she would launch. I had simply known she would. Beat. Slight shift. Narrative. Steady. My name is Priya Anand. I was 37 the Saturday my best friend of 12 years decided that 12 years of trust was a resource she could spend once and walk away from. She had been miscalculating the cost of that decision for 3 weeks. She just did not know it yet. Slow tone. It did not start with the launch. It started 20 months earlier, on an evening in October when I sat across from her at the kitchen table she had eaten at 100 times and told her about the idea I had been building quietly for over a year. Her name was Diane Marsh. We had met in our mid-20s at a job we had both left within a year of each other, and the friendship had survived everything that friendships survive when they are real. Distance, relationships, career changes, the slow rebuilding after difficult years. I had trusted her completely. That is the part I have had to sit with the longest. Pause. The business concept was a specialized consulting framework for small creative businesses, a structured system for pricing, client management, and sustainable growth that I had developed over 14 months of research, testing, and refinement. It was not a vague idea. It was a documented methodology with a specific process, a client intake system, a pricing calculator, and a delivery framework I had tested with 3 pilot clients before I showed it to anyone. Cold anger. Contained. I showed it to Diane because I trusted her judgment and because she had a background in marketing that I thought would help me see gaps in how I was positioning it. Before I shared the full documentation, my attorney had drafted a standard NDA, not because I suspected Diane specifically, but because my attorney had told me years earlier that sharing proprietary business concepts without documentation was a habit that cost people more than they expected and less than they deserved to lose. Diane signed it without hesitation, which I had taken as confirmation that I was being overly cautious. Beat. Building tension. She asked good questions that evening. She engaged with the framework seriously. She offered 3 suggestions I actually incorporated into the final version. When she left that night, she hugged me at the door and said it was the best idea I had ever had and she could not wait to watch me launch it. Slow, deliberate. I believed her. I spent the next 6 months refining the framework, building the client materials, and preparing for a launch I had planned for the following spring. Then, in February, I noticed something small and wrong. A post on Diane's social media, deleted within an hour of going up, that referenced a consulting framework for creative businesses, a phrase I recognized, not identical, close enough. Pause. I took a screenshot before it disappeared. I sat with it for 3 days before I called my attorney, not to act immediately, but to ask a question. If someone who signed an NDA launches something that protects methodology, when is the right time to move? Her answer was careful and precise. When you have documentation of the launch, confirmation of the similarity, and enough evidence to demonstrate the connection clearly, not before. Cold. I spent the next 3 weeks building that file. every original draft with its creation timestamp, every email exchange with Diane about the framework, including her suggestions and my responses incorporating them, which established both her knowledge of the content and her active engagement with its development. The signed NDA with the date and her signature, and a side-by-side comparison document my attorney prepared showing the framework I had developed and the publicly available materials from Diane's business, which had a name, a website, and a launch event scheduled for the first Saturday in April. Voice hardens. I did not call her, I did not text her, I sent her good morning back every day the same way I always had, because the most important thing I could do in those 3 weeks was give her no reason to accelerate, delete, or modify anything before my attorney had finished building the file. Pause. Measured. The launch event post went up on a Friday evening. I read it carefully. The language was hers, but the architecture underneath it was mine. The same 3-phase structure, the same client intake sequence, the same pricing philosophy, pressed in different words the way a room gets painted a different color without changing the walls. Beat. I forwarded the post to my attorney at 9:17 that evening. She replied at 9:41. File is ready. How do you want to proceed? Narrative, slightly slower. I thought about that question for longer than she expected. 12 years is not nothing. The friendship was real before it became a calculation. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I did not want to pretend otherwise just because the ending was clean on paper. Cold, even. But I had also spent 14 months building something that belonged to me, and 3 weeks watching someone prepare to launch it under her name while texting me good morning like the distance between those two things did not exist. Mid-script cliffhanger. Slow, ominous. My attorney sent the cease and desist letter on the Monday morning after the Saturday launch. It was addressed to Diane directly and copied to the venue where she had held her launch event, the business registration address on her new company filing, and the email she used for professional correspondence, which happened to be the same one she had used to confirm her attendance at my kitchen table 20 months earlier and to sign the NDA my attorney had drafted that same week. Pause. Diane read it at 11:14 on Monday morning. I know this because she called me at 11:17, which was the fastest 3 minutes of her life and the slowest 3 minutes I had spent since the screenshot arrived on Saturday. Stay with me, because the conversation that followed was not what either of us had prepared for, and what she said in the first 30 seconds of it told me more about the preceding 20 months than anything she had said in the 12 years before them.
She did not deny it. That was the first thing I had not expected. I had prepared for denial, for reframing, for the version of the story where she had developed the same concept independently and the similarity was coincidence. She did not offer any of those. What she said, in a voice that had lost all of the warmth I had heard in it for 12 years, was this: "I didn't think you were going to launch it." I let that sentence sit in the air between us for a moment before I responded. "What made you think that?" "You kept pushing the timeline," she said. "Every time I asked, you were still refining, still not ready. I thought you were going to let it sit forever." "So you launched it yourself?" I said. "I built on it," she said. "I added things." Built on it. The phrase people use when they want to describe taking something that belongs to someone else in language that sounds like contribution. "You signed an NDA," I said. "Priya, we are best friends. I didn't think you actually meant the NDA." I want to be honest about what I felt when she said that. Not anger exactly, something more specific. The feeling of understanding, finally and completely, that the version of me she had kept in her mind for 12 years was someone whose preparations were performances and whose paperwork was theater. She had signed the agreement and decided it was decoration. She had taken the framework and decided my slowness in launching was permission. She had been wrong about both. "The NDA is a legal document," I said. "It means what it says, regardless of what you thought I meant by it." "What do you want?" she asked, and her voice had changed again,
past the initial shock into something more calculated. A settlement? My attorney will outline the terms, I said. I think you should read the letter carefully before we talk again. I ended the call. The terms my attorney had outlined were specific: immediate cessation of the business using the protected framework, removal of all public materials derived from my methodology, a licensing fee for the period of operation since the launch, calculated on the basis of the revenue model she had used, which was itself taken directly from my pricing calculator, and a written acknowledgement of the NDA's validity and the source of the framework. Diane's response came through her own attorney 4 days later, which told me she had spent those 4 days doing two things: finding legal representation and deciding how much of the situation she was willing to acknowledge. Her attorney's letter argued that the framework Diane had used was sufficiently different from my original to fall outside the NDA's scope, and requested that I provide specific evidence of the similarities before any settlement discussion could proceed. My attorney had anticipated this. The side-by-side comparison document she had prepared 3 weeks earlier was 41 pages long, annotated and cross-referenced to the original time-stamped drafts. It went back the same day. Diane's attorney called mine the following morning. The conversation, I was told, was brief. He had reviewed the comparison document overnight. He advised his client to settle. The negotiation took 9 days. Diane's attorney was professional and efficient, which told me she had also told her the full story, and he had told her clearly what the documentation meant for her position. By the end of the 9 days, 3 things had been agreed. The business, using my framework, was shut down. All public materials removed. A formal written acknowledgement that the methodology originated from my work and that the NDA had been valid and binding. The financial settlement was the last item. My attorney had calculated it on the basis of the revenue Diane had generated in the 3 weeks between launch and the cease and desist letter, applied against the licensing rate that would have applied had she approached me legitimately before using the framework. The number was not large in absolute terms, but it was precise, documented, and tied directly to the value she had extracted from something that was not hers to take. She paid it within the agreed timeline. No further communication came from her attorney after the final document was signed. Diane herself did not contact me again after our 11:17 phone call, which lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and ended with me putting the phone down on a 12-year friendship that had, it turned out, been operating on a set of assumptions about me that were never accurate. I launched my own business 6 weeks after the settlement closed. Not because I had been waiting for the resolution to proceed, but because the 3 weeks I had spent building the documentation file had also clarified something I had been using the refining stage to avoid. I was ready. I had been ready for longer than I had admitted to myself. The launch was quiet. No event, no announcement beyond a post and an email to the 3 pilot clients who had worked with me during the development stage. Within the first month, 2 of them referred new clients. Within the first quarter, I had a waiting list. The framework worked because it had been built carefully over 14 months by someone who had tested every piece of it before asking anyone else to trust it. That part had never been in question. I did not speak publicly about what had happened with Diane, not to mutual friends, not on social media, not in any space where it could become a story that traveled faster than I could control the context. What I said when people asked why I had finally launched after such a long preparation period was that I had needed to make sure everything was in place before I moved, which was true in more ways than one. The mutual friends noticed Diane's business had disappeared. A few of them asked me about it, carefully, in the way people ask about things they suspect they already partially understand. I told them I could not speak to what Diane had decided to do with her business, which was also true and also enough. Diane and I have not spoken since the 4-minute phone call. I do not expect we will. The friendship had been real for 12 years, and the ending of it is its own grief, separate from the business, separate from the documentation, separate from the settlement. I carry both things because both things are true. What she did was a betrayal. What we had before it was also real. I am not required to collapse one into the other to make the story simpler. The NDA lives in the same folder as the settlement agreement now, behind the current client contracts, behind the business registration, behind the insurance documents. I take it out sometimes not to look at it, but to remember that my attorney was right 14 months before I needed her to be. The habit of documentation is not paranoia, it is preparation. And preparation, it turns out, is the only thing that works when trust runs out before the paperwork does. My business is still running. The framework is still mine. The waiting list has not shortened. On the 1-year anniversary of the launch, I sent a note to each of my pilot clients thanking them for being part of the early stage. One of them wrote back and said she had recommended me to 6 people because I was the only consultant she had worked with who delivered exactly what she had been shown in the original framework. No variation, no shortcuts, no version that was close but not quite the same. I read that email twice. Then I saved it in the same folder, because documentation, I have learned, is not only for the things that go wrong. She thought my slowness was hesitation. It was construction. She thought my trust was the absence of preparation. It was the presence of patience. And she thought the NDA was a formality between friends. It was the most important document in the room, and she had signed it herself. If someone asks you to share what you have built, make sure you know the difference between feedback and a blueprint, and make sure whatever you hand across the table has your name on every page.